Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
I never thought in a million years when I was working at the pit that I would be on a salary of £91,346. It's a fortune, you know. It's an absolute fortune.
That's the Labour MP Ian Lavery discussing MPs' salaries in the Commons at the end of July. So how much should politicians and top advisors be paid? Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. Welcome to the programme. So we're talking about this because we have learned that Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Sue Gray, is being paid £170,000 a year. This according to BBC reporting. Gray effectively earning more than the Prime Minister himself. It has reignited a long-standing debate in the UK about how much we pay our public servants and their advisors. It's politically sensitive. One camp believes politicians and advisors are paid far too much. Another, that you need to pay more to get the best people. April's above inflation pay rise for MPs means that they're earning just over £90,000. It was largely unpopular with voters, despite the figure being set by the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority.
You know, the Taxpayers Alliance has talked about people being aghast at this move. But if we just take a look at how much politicians are paid in other countries, in Ireland, TDs are paid around £3,000 more a year than British MPs, and you do the conversion. In France, it's about £8,000 less. In Germany, it's some 20% more. Of course, there are different allowances in each case which apply as well. You know, other comparisons, an MP's salary, double the average wage in London, but less than, for example, what a newly qualified lawyer would be paid at one of the top firms in London as well. But are any of these comparisons actually helpful when it comes to people who are, after all, public servants?
Joining us today with more on the case for a political pay bump is Matthew Lesh, who is Public Policy Fellow at the Free Market Institute of Economic Affairs and a country manager at the business consultancy Freshwater Strategy. Matthew, welcome back to Bloomberg Radio. Nice to speak to you. There are several issues at play here, though, aren't there? What a key political advisor earns versus the Prime Minister versus MPs. Firstly, should Sue Gray be getting a salary of £170,000 per year?
Look, I think it is a problem in a sense that Sue Gray is getting a salary of £170,000 per year, and that is more than the Prime Minister. But I think that actually honestly says more about the fact that we're not paying the Prime Minister enough. We're not paying MPs enough to ensure that they're getting the salaries that they deserve, as opposed to other arguably less important roles in the public sector that do receive more pay than the PM.
So how much should, in your view, then, the Prime Minister and MPs be paid?
Look, I think at the core of this debate is this understanding that MPs are, and in particular ministers and the Prime Minister, are doing extremely important, essential jobs. And they're working long hours, they're doing frequent travel, they have significant responsibilities. And for a lot of people, in terms of if we want to attract the best people into politics, they look at it and they say, that's a pretty pathetic salary. That's a massive pay reduction compared to what you're going to get at the top of any other field in the UK. So it's that general principle that if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. And I think part of the issue, not entirely the issue, part of the issue of why we're not getting the best people into Parliament is because we're not paying them enough. I'm careful about saying exactly what the pay should be, but I think there's a case of paying them more. If we look at Singapore, which perhaps are the best paid, the Prime Minister gets the equivalent of over £1 million each year. I think that's probably a fairer salary for a top position. And if you look at what a CEO in the UK receives as opposed to the Prime Minister, you're talking many, many millions more. Now, I do understand that this is a public service and it's never going to be the same as the private sector, and you do want some intrinsic motivation, but a little bit of extra pay wouldn't be a bad thing, and it wouldn't cost that much in the scheme of things either.
I mean, in financial services circles, that comparison to Singapore might not seem odd, but that aside, MPs earn about 3 times the average salary of the UK. Also, it's just come out of cost of living crisis, inflation at more, than a 40-year high. I mean, surely not the time, really, an awkward territory for there to be an increase in salaries to politicians.
Look, absolutely awkward indeed, and that's why I don't think my model of MP salary is going to be taken up by any government or any parliament anytime soon. But I think there's a point here, which is, yes, it's much more than the average salary, but we don't want the average person in parliament. We want the best possible talent in our country to be going into Parliament to govern us. If there are financial concerns, I think actually one way to do this would be to halve the number of MPs and double their salaries. There's arguably too many MPs. They don't necessarily need to have a parliament that's as big, and it would cost the same, perhaps even less, if you doubled their salaries due to the other associated costs. So there would be ways to address this in the context of financial issues.
I've also seen you argue previously that the politicians should have much bigger staff when it comes to having advisors in with them. What is the argument for that? You know, a lot of people would say that, you know, their civil servants are there to provide the support, and it doesn't take a huge amount of political appointees to do more than sort of filter between what the political priorities are and how the already existing architecture of state should be able to take them up and make them into policy.
I actually think Britain's pretty unique in the lack of political appointees, particularly compared to the United States, but even in Australia, where they have dozens of directly appointed political staff. The civil service has a very important role in terms of interpreting and implementing government policy. But at the moment, the Prime Minister has a bit of extra staff, but the average minister will have 2, 3, maybe 4 personal members of staff. The only people that they actually themselves can hire and fire, who they can direct to do work for them, who understand their political priorities, who understand what they're trying to get done. And those small number of staff are just basically overwhelmed with the amount of issues, policies, papers, write-arounds, all this kind of ongoing process that
hence the business for places like the Institute for Economic Affairs. No, you can help them along with their policy making.
Well, to some extent, you can give them outside advice, but there's a lot of things that you can't actually. If something's going on in cabinet, you can't ask for outside advice and opinion on it. That's confidential information that can't be spread beyond your very small team. The civil servants are there to serve you, but they can't serve you quite in the same way. And I think we have to be honest here and say often civil servants also have their own priorities, their own opinions, their own things that they're trying to push. Maybe they think it's for the best, but maybe it's not necessarily in the political interest of the government. And it's good to have a counterbalance through these political staff members who can put a different lens over what's going on and support the minister in their work and actually get more done. Because otherwise, I think you really slow down the process of government because you have so many political staffers who can look over things before they go to the minister, and the minister only has so much time. So then you either don't get things properly checked over, so things are going on that the minister has no idea about, but they're responsible for, or alternatively just slow down all the decision making and nothing really happens. I don't think that's good for the country at all.
Do we want more money motivated MPs? I raise this because there's also the issue, you know, with the relative decline in terms of salaries. If you look, you know, at inflation eating away at them in recent years, and the cost of living in London, do you think that we want, you know, more money motivated MPs, or does it add to diversity of thought?
Well, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of person is going to go into Parliament when, let's say, they have a large family, they're successful, they have a high paying job. They're probably going to have to be someone who is already themselves. So that means a lot of people actually can't go into Parliament because they don't have that kind of maybe perhaps family wealth that can support them through it. If you don't pay them, or you actually potentially reduce the diversity, you also potentially, and we're seeing a lot of this at the moment, increase the risk of corruption, increase the potential that they're going to have to accept money from other sources in order to be able to fund their offices, which happens quite often. They're going to have to get money for other kinds of benefits like clothes, which seems to be happening at the moment quite a lot, particularly with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's wife. So there's probably, I think, a pretty strong argument that whilst you don't, as you've said, necessarily want MPs just funded by money, everyone does have to put food on the table. Everyone does want to maintain a quality of life. And if somebody is, you know, wanting to contribute, wanting to make a public contribution, but just can't because the salary is too low, I think that's a problem.
But how do you win over voters and the general public to that argument as well? They'll say it's their taxes paying for these people. The salaries comparatively to what average earnings are extremely high. It's a difficult political argument to win.
Well, indeed, and thankfully I'm not a politician, and I don't have to make the political argument for what some might say is a bit of a wacky idea. I mean, I suppose it would take a willingness and almost like a bipartisan willingness to be willing to do the case for it. I think this has all become much harder after the expenses scandal. I think that there is that underlying sense that MPs are corrupt and that they're in it for themselves, even though that may well be in the past and all the rules have changed about how you can spend your money. There's still that underlying perception that something is going wrong. And I think that scandal really destroyed a lot of the trust that could enable MPs to be paid better and could enable the attraction of talent. I don't think that there is an easy way to make that political argument. I think we're going to end up pretty much stuck where we are, which is MPs are paid well, but often not enough to attract people at the top of their game, so you don't get the best people into Parliament.
Okay. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us. Matthew Lesh is Public Policy Fellow at the Free Market Institute of Economic Affairs and a country manager at the business consultancy Freshwater Strategy. Really appreciate your time this morning. I wonder just how far this question around salaries is going to go. Is it particularly acute because it's a Labour government in office, and the issue around salaries actually goes much, much broader? I mean, obviously we've had a lot of public sector workers striking, and there's been concern amongst the civil servants also in terms of salary increases.
Yeah, and your question about real terms income as well, I mean, is interesting and perhaps should be feeding more into this debate, particularly when it comes down to those political staff being recruited. We've just had a huge turnover in Parliament, so a lot of people have gone back out into the jobs market. A lot of people have had to be attracted in to work for various Labour MPs as well. And I wonder if this is an issue that we'll be hearing more about when it comes to paying for those advisors, because many of those new MPs joining Parliament as well might not have the support structures and perhaps might see their ability to be able to deliver good work harmed by the fact they can't get the right people to work with them and to be able to further their own agendas.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an interesting one. Pay and politics. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tua Adebayo. Our audio engineer was Sean Guastamakia. I'm Stephen Carroll.
And I'm Caroline Hepker, and we'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.